Hey guys, welcome into the Bear With Us podcast. I'm Jack. He is Frank. Frankie, we got a draft to talk about. Let's fucking go. We did talk a little bit about Darnell Wright when he initially got drafted on Thursday night. If you're curious to get our initial thoughts on that, go check out that episode after you listen to this one, where we'll go a little more in depth about the pick. And then, of course, we'll be breaking down the rest of the draft as well. We'll give our favorite picks, our least favorite, or, our maybe picks we wish they would have gone with instead. And then we'll talk a little more about what we can expect from this offseason. I believe, Frank, rookie minicamp is like this weekend or something like that.
It comes around quick. They have like a quick 3-day rookie minicamp. Yeah.
Yeah, I forget how fast this offseason typically tends to go until we get to about like June or July, and then it's just brutal. But in the meantime, Frank, let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and just list off the picks that the Bears made, the 10 draft picks, which, my God, I think that's the most amount of draft picks the Bears have had in forever. It feels like, especially in the last few years, we've only had like 5 picks to talk about just because of how many trades have happened and whatnot. So going over the Bears draft here, they traded back from the first pick. Obviously, we've talked a lot about that. They traded again to the 9th pick. They traded back one more spot in the first round to get Darnell Wright, picking up a 2024 4th-round pick. Again, we talked a little bit about that trade. Frank, just kind of looking back on it, has your thoughts changed at all about Jalen Carter? Are you still kind of like, I wish we had maybe taken a risk? Do you still like the pick of Darnell Wright?
I loved it, especially passing on Jalen Carter. I mean, to me, that, and I think it's going to be something that we're going to talk about over the next couple of years as they're building this thing. Like, it's very clear that like character matters. And again, like, throw away the incidents, chalk that up as like mistakes. But the other things that we heard from everyone is just the immaturity. Again, the pro day thing was like, you failed an open book test. This team isn't ready for that yet. And everyone, because if all works out, this kid has the potential to be a Hall of Fame defensive tackle. We know the pro comps that he's had, the names that were brought up, with during the draft process for Jalen Carter. But, you also need to couple that with a situation that can actually help bring him along. And the Bears just aren't there yet. They're another draft or two away from being able to take those sorts of chances. They needed this pick to absolutely hit. You think about a plug and play tackle. Darnell Wright was it.
Yeah, and again, you think about just the situation that Jalen, and that's the thing too, is the Bears were not the only team that needed a defensive tackle. Like, we talked about how impressive Jalen Carter was as a prospect just from the football side. And there were a few teams we thought that he could go to, even before reaching to 9. And, that being Seattle, Detroit, the Raiders, even,
they
still need talent. The Cardinals as well. A lot of those teams in the top 10 needed Jalen Carter, and almost everybody passed on him except for the Eagles trading up. But again, it's just where the Eagles are at, with their team, the way that it's been built. Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith, I think they have now 6 Georgia Bulldogs on that team. Like, it's pretty funny how many Georgia players they have. It almost feels like Ryan Pace may have taken over the Philadelphia Eagles at some point just to go get those guys. But again, I think it's, and listening to some of the conversations that were had after the draft where people opened up a little bit more about who they were targeting. Darnell Wright, it sounds like the Bears put him through the ringer in terms of like a draft workout and like crazy shit, like things. I think that his Darnell Wright's agent was like, I've never heard of this. Like, it's crazy. And he just kept pushing, and then he didn't quit, didn't give up. And on the flip side, they talked a little bit about just coming out from the pro day. Because, Frank, that was the first time you were like, I'm out. Like, I'm out. I don't care what his criminal stuff, I don't care what that comes back as. I'm out regardless. And apparently that was the same for the Bears, because he was like ready to quit. And just with all the outside baggage, like, it makes a lot of sense that he may have not been in the best physical shape. but there had also been question marks before the criminal stuff that had come out. So that was kind of the thing for the Bears as well, that Jalen Carter, just maybe not the right time, not the right fit right now. But I'm fully on board with the Darnell Wright pick. Absolutely.
No, I'm right there with you.
Extra fourth rounder for fucking nothing.
And that was the thing. That was the only thing that annoyed me about the whole thing with the fourth rounder. Everyone on Twitter, like, I can't believe you passed up. Like, they equated it to being us trading Jalen Carter for a fourth round pick. And it's like, that's not even remotely close to what happened.
Nuts, dude.
They were passing on him.
Nuts.
It was beyond annoying. They were passing on him. They had some sort of leverage because Ryan Poles talked about it after day one. He said there were other teams that wanted to trade up to 9. We weren't comfortable going that far back because Darnell was our guy. And we told the Eagles straight out, we will consider it if they flat out just go crazy. They give us a king's ransom that we can't refuse. But throw us something, we'll let you move up and you can take them. I mean, it sounded like there were pretty blatant conversations happening when they were on the clock at 9. So that was the only thing that annoyed me, where people were acting like we should have gotten like a second-round pick to move up one spot for a guy that we weren't going to take anyway. Had no one offered anything and there was no possibility to trade back, they would have taken Darnell Wright at 9.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do wonder who that team was that might have been looking to jump. Part of me feels like it might have been like the Titans at 11, maybe. Because that seems like a very Titans decision to make. Because not like a lot of defensive players went after, like defensive line guys went super far after that. And again, the Bears didn't want to trade super far back because they wanted to keep the ability to draft Darnell Wright. That was their guy. That's who they wanted. Obviously, that's who they drafted. But moving into the second round, because we haven't had a chance to talk about these players at all. The number 32 overall pick, obviously the pick that they owned, was traded for Chase Claypool. We talked a ton about that. And it'll be interesting, Frank, because the player that was selected was Joey Porter Jr., the cornerback from Penn State. I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't a little disappointed that the Bears hadn't been in that spot, because I really like Joey Porter, and I think that would have been a good fit for them, especially with the way they like physical corners. But overall, I don't necessarily think it's like the worst pick to miss out on. Now, obviously, that took them out of the running on getting other players that were available, like any of the tight ends. Isaiah Forsky from Notre Dame, who I thought, or Foskey, I should say, who I thought could have been a really good fit for them. Some other players, but they did end up drafting at the number 53 overall pick that they got for Roquan Smith, Gervon Dexter, the defensive tackle from Florida. And then they traded up with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They traded the 61st overall pick to the Jaguars to be able to trade up to the 56 to get Tyreek Stevenson. Frank, these two players, Gervon Dexter, Tyreek Stevenson, what do you think?
Obviously, I think it goes without being said, I wasn't very familiar with either of these two players going into the draft. The draft knowledge starts to really wane off, round 2 for non-skill position guys. I was all in on for dynasty purposes. I know a ton of the dudes who were going in the 6th and 7th round. You know what I mean?
We know about Tyler Scott. All right, we'll get to him.
That's what I'm saying. And even who was the dude from A.T. Perry? Everyone thought was going to go way earlier. And I mean, there are dudes who went late. You're keeping up with. Anyway, I have liked what I heard about Gervon. So I guess to put it in perspective, everything that you heard about Jalen Carter being, the comps being like Warren Sapp, just like a bigger, very athletic game wrecker, and Ndamukong Suh. That was who Jalen Carter reminded me of. More Ndamukong Suh type of player, like clog up the middle, really strong, can take on 2 or 3 blockers, and still get pressure on a quarterback. As I was watching Gervon's tape, he reminded me, it's cool because you're seeing this sort of cover 2, this sort of philosophy come together on defense, I think, with this draft, because he reminded me a lot of Anthony Adams. His tape did.
Ooh, okay.
And it was a former Bear who goes on one of the NBC shows. It may have been who was the dude that from Florida? Why am I blanking?
Jonathan Bullard?
No, he was a defensive end for us way back in the day.
Alex Brown.
Alex Brown was talking about it, and he was like, look, as great as it was, or as great as it would have been to have a talent like Jalen Carter, think back to how many really good defenses that the Bears had with this cover 2 under Lovey, when did they ever have a really dominant 3-tech? Like, they had Tommy Harris, but he was usually hurt. But like, we had super successful years with guys who weren't like star names. He's like, you always take that type of talent on the interior, but it's not necessary for this defense. And he was sort of breaking down, what it does take to build that. And he was just talking about the 2 defensive. I know we're going to get to the other one soon, but like, those are the types that fit. Those are the type, the athletic profile, the arm length, like everything was there. I know a lot of people, not a lot, it seemed a little bit split. Some people thought he was drafted right. Some people thought he could have been had a round later, but I mean, he looked explosive on tape. He looked good. And then you just sort of coupling that what they did with free agency, Jack. I mean, all in all, the floor has been raised, especially on defense. The floor is like, still concerns about edge that we'll get to, but that interior line. I know we're going to talk a little bit later as well about sort of what Matt Eberflus's job is going to be in all this in the coming years, but they're building the way he likes to build. He likes to build on the inside out. He would prefer to start interior and go outside, and getting 2 defensive tackles, in the top 65 is a way to do that. What did you feel about Gervon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that clearly just from the draft overall, Ryan Poles values the athletic ability much more than statistics, much more than, other things that people are scouting. And he's looking, I mean, the relative athletic score was like all very high. Like, he doesn't care about your numbers or how much you played in college, at least it seems like. He cares if what you have are non-teachable traits, so that when you get to the coaching staff, he's going to turn that over to Matt Eberflus and trust that his coaches that he hired are able to develop these players and bring the best out of these guys. Gervon Dexter, I like the size, like you see it, like just watching his tape from Florida, like you just see that he's like a legitimate defensive tackle. He's going to be I think he's going to be a very, very good player in this defense. And like you said, they're looking to build inside out right now. They're looking to go inside, dent the pocket, make it a little bit easier for the edge rushers. Frank, I'm not going to lie to you. I think that the part of me thinks that the Bears might still believe in Trevis Gibson to a certain extent. They also might think that Dominique Robinson can take another step, given full offseason has already been in the defense for a year. And maybe they just want to focus on that. But there's a lot of rotation. I think what's really good is they're building a lot of their depth right now. Like, we were just talking about the grades we were giving the defensive line. And I mean, you look at their unofficial depth chart right now, it is very hard not to feel a lot better about it.
Oh yeah.
As we talk today.
Mine was an F. It'd probably be a D+ now. But yeah,
sure.
I mean, that's raising the floor phenomenally. And that's without us seeing, guys, the rookies coming in, the free agent signings, the progress that the guys that came in last year. So yeah, absolutely.
And it didn't really help that a lot of, I mean, you think of how many defensive linemen went in the first round and the upper echelon of the second round. The board didn't really fall to them to have to, to be able to go more of positional need, which again, I like that Ryan Poles, we've talked about this as well. We didn't think Ryan Poles should just be sacrificing everything to go for one specific position. This team isn't built like that right now, built to do that at this moment. They need everything.
Yep.
So, it seems like Ryan Poles got a guy that he really likes. The other guy that they drafted in the second round, Tyrique Stevenson. Frank, I was watching some of that tape that the Bears posted on their Twitter.
Yeah.
Man, it's hard not to get excited about this dude. What do you think of Tyrique Stevenson?
But first of all, let me not, act like I love the pick immediately. It wasn't anything against him. We had the same conversation last year when they took 2 secondary players in the second round as their first picks of the draft. But I wanted to come away from this draft with a future starting center. It didn't happen. It just is what it is. So I was upset with the cornerback pick. Again, nothing against him. I knew nothing about him. But then watching his tape, sort of isolating who he is as a player. You talk about what you like about Joey Porter. being as physical. God damn, is that kid physical? I mean, he lays the lumber. But my only thoughts were, I'm a little conflicted, Jack, and maybe you can sway me one way or the other. So the one thing that we talked about in last year's draft was that they picked 2 secondary pieces when the offense was in dire need. Because forget the defense, they weren't going to win very much anyway. They got the first overall pick, right? It all came together. But we needed them to be stars. And that doesn't necessarily mean in year one. It takes time to develop, but those two need to be stars. As the season went along, Kyler Gordon played more and more nickelback versus outside. A little worrisome, but then here's where the conflict comes into play. All offseason last year, the coaching staff, the front office said, we're going to find where guys play best and we're going to put them there. That means offensive line, that means linebackers, that means secondary pieces, everyone. We're going to see what they do best and we're going to play to their strengths. So the conflict comes in. One, it's very clear to me that they did that and they said, you know what, Kyler may be okay or above average outside, but we think he's great on the inside. So the positive is that your coaching staff found a spot for someone, found somewhere to put that sort of talent. But the negative is we drafted a nickelback in the second round. You know what I mean? Like that is sort of the negative to it, which can also be spun into a positive of like, you sort of know what you have now and you're not going to, force a square peg into a round hole, which is a good thing. I mean, you've talked about, even what they did with Velus Jones last year and like benching him, like not doubling down on your mistake. Those are good things. But again, the talent evaluation can be a little bit worrisome when it comes to Kyler Gordon and where they're playing him. And then fast forwarding to the Tyrique Stevenson thing, that sort of confirmed they do not want, they don't want Kyler on the outside. This dude is not, he's a long guy. He's not playing inside. Kyler he's a little bit smaller than him, so he's clearly going to be their nickel guy moving forward. I know it's a passing league, and I know they're going to stress the importance of the nickelback position. I get that. But you can sign some nickelbacks in free agency and use that second-round pick last year on George Pickens. You know what I mean? Like, there are things that you could have done a little bit, and all will be forgiven as this team continues. There's going to be mistakes, right? Like, no GM is perfect. No coaching staff is ever perfect. But that was what was bothersome to me. Do you view it in, like, a similar lens, or like, where do you stand on that?
I think that's a really, it's funny. It's like, I really treated this, I'm not going to lie to you, I really treated this as Ryan Poles' first draft. Like, he had all of his picks to work with. He had all the capital he could need. This felt more like a Ryan Poles. Like, you just think about how he attacked this draft versus what he did and really didn't do last year. There wasn't a whole lot of movement that he was doing last year. And I think it was just because he didn't really know what he had in his roster. Now, granted, that's not an excuse to not draft the best, players, but the right players or anything. But I do agree with you that, I have a feeling, I have a sneaking suspicion that Poles last year was kind of just drafting best player available, what he may have known from certain guys. I think he was also probably trusting the scouts a little bit more because, again, I mean, he was hired as the Bears GM a little bit later than some of the other GMs that got hired last year. So, like, maybe it was a timing thing. I'm not quite sure, but I agree. A nickel corner as your second ever pick in the second, like, it's not ideal. We've talked about how we would have preferred one of those wide receivers. Again, I think it's kind of like it is kind of a linear thing, right? Like, if they have George Pickens or Alec Pierce, maybe they don't feel the need to send a high second round pick for Chase Claypool, which I'm still not quite sure I understand why that pick was the pick that it was. It sounds like there were other teams, obviously, who wanted him, which fine, fair, whatever, is what it is at the end of the day. But then if you don't do that, if you draft a wide receiver, then Tyrique Stevenson here makes a lot more sense because you do need that outside corner. And I mean, I will say this, Frank, just watching the player, I think, and just the way people were talking about the Bears basically getting a steal entire. Now, granted, we hear that all the time about steal this, steal that, and then they end up being busts, whatever. But from a player perspective, just watching what he was doing, I mean, he's super athletic.
Yeah.
He has a good eye for the ball too. Like he made some really damn good plays on the ball that I think the Bears need because they didn't get a whole lot of turnovers in their secondary as much as you would really hope, especially in this type of defense. That being said, Vikings just added my favorite wide receiver in this draft. You know, maybe you do need 3 corners, like you were saying. I know it's a passing league. I know you said that, but I get what you're saying in terms of like we really like hindsight. We just drafted a nickel corner when we again could have had potentially a very good young wide receiver to pair with your very good young quarterback.
Yeah, no, and that was where my mind went. But the thing is, Jackie, I'm watching Tyreek's tape. To me, it's we talk a lot about identity. We talked a lot about, you know, just them building something, and this is gonna be this is gonna remain true with a lot of these picks. They have a type. If you just like whited out his jersey, you would have thought you were looking at Jaquan Brisker. Like they have a type. Obviously a different position, but just the physicality of it, just the way he got after it, and even Kyler Gordon's tape was similar to that. Kyler Gordon, and it's funny. I guess maybe we should have done a little bit better broadcasting that he would be a nickel, because now that I'm thinking about it, Kyler Gordon's tape reminded me a lot of Bryce Callahan. Just that like a little bit smaller, all over the field, not scared to, you know, throw yourself in the mix with tackles and things. So they're gonna sell us on it. I get it, and if they start winning or whenever they start winning, we're gonna drink the Kool-Aid, and it is what it is. But that's just where my mind went with it. But Jackie, then the next pick sort of goes hand in hand with the Gervon Dexter and Zach Pickens at 64.
Zach with 2 C's. Don't leave out that extra C.
Zach with 2 C's. My only point I want to make, I've been talking first about all the prospects. The one thing that I did see, and I'm not going to act like I didn't want it as well. I did want an edge rusher, right? I think every Bears fan in the world wanted an edge rusher. But can we all agree that the run defense as a whole was much worse than the pass defense? Because at least the secondary showed a lot of spots. There's a lot of highlights last year in spurts, of course. The pass rush wasn't there at all. I get it, but they couldn't stop a nosebleed when it came to the run defense. And to me, talking about raising that floor, these 2 defensive tackles, coupled with Billings, coupled with Walker, I mean, these guys that they got are run stuffers. That is a really, really good, like, we may be to a point where, like, the year or 2 before the Bears pulled the trigger on getting Khalil Mack, when it was like they were getting coverage sacks. They were stuffing the run really well, but they weren't necessarily rushing the passer all that great. Like, I think that's what we're getting to right now. Again, everyone wants an edge rusher, as we should, but if you're talking about a hole, the biggest hole on that defense last year, which is saying a ton because the pass rush was god-awful, but the run defense was off. I mean, do you remember, Jack, last year coming out of the preseason games, I was like, dude, I'm really scared that we're not gonna be able to stop the run. I know this is preseason, but this is bad. And you got guy like everyone's concerned with the linebackers that the Bears paid, and like, well, what's gonna happen? Well, this is how you build to help have those linebackers make plays. You know, like, again, pass rush and everything, that's to be seen, but they're gonna be able to hit their holes. They're gonna be able to hit, you know, shoot the gaps. They're gonna be able to even blitz better because you have guys on the interior that are blocking up holes, just being big and being disruptive. So I was very happy. Throw it over to you, Jack. Zach, 2 C's. How are we feeling?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you, Frank. I was just a little bit pissed, and I didn't really get pissed at all throughout this draft because, again, I knew the Bears kind of needed basically everything, but there were certain guys that you and I have talked about on the podcast where I'm like, kind of keep an eye out for this guy. And like Marvin Mims, like he literally got drafted the pick before the Bears' 3rd round pick. And I was like, you fucking motherfuckers, Denver Broncos, you assholes. Frank, my God, you know, real quick, as an aside, I don't know how many times I had to text one of my friends who was also watching the draft on a pick by pick basis. It's like, I mean, goddamn, every wide receiver in this draft, I swear, was like, you know, he's fast, but he's pretty small. And it's like, Jesus, like, this is the smallest wide receiver draft I can remember in a very, very long time. And Marvin Mims is no exception to that rule. But anyways, the Zach Pickens pick, Frank, I mean, geez, people were comparing him to DeForest Buckner. And I was like, come on, get out of here. And then you start watching it and you're like, oh, okay. I mean, maybe it's a little unfair because he's a 3rd round pick and DeForest Buckner went in the 1st round. But like Zach Pickens is fucking monster, man. Like I'm not mad about doubling down on the defensive tackle because you bring up an excellent point. The Bears' run defense was absolutely pathetic. I mean, they let every team run all over them. And it was an absolute need, granted. And this is kind of where I want to talk about this a little bit more, Frank. People who are acting like the Bears, like Ryan Poles made a mistake by drafting defensive tackles and not edge rushers. Like, man, we tried to tell you guys, this is going to be a multi-year rebuild. You're not going to get every single thing in one draft, no matter how many picks you have. And Ryan Poles addressed a ton of needs in this draft. And we can't just pretend like defensive tackle isn't a need. You sign Andrew Billings, sure, but that was a 1-year deal. He might not even be a starter as of now. Like, there's that interior defensive line is going to be so good. And you watch how the Eagles so improved this year. Their defensive line just rotated. Like, you need as many pass rushers as you can get, but you also need to be able to stop the run. And I think that these two guys are really going to be able to make that impact.
I agree. But I also love the doubling down on it from free agency as well, because the pressure isn't on these guys to come in and be day one starters. If it happens, and great. But they have a chance to sit and be, or I don't want to say sit there, and that's like a quarterback, but you're going to be more rotational early on and get to learn from guys who are playing the 3-in-1 technique. So I'm really excited about both of those picks, man. And again, it was really funny because a lot of people thought that the Gervon Dexter, I don't know why I'm having trouble saying Dexter today, pick was a little bit of a reach, but then they thought the Zach Pickens pick was like, why is he still on the board? This is crazy. So that sort of evened out, the consensus there, which made me feel very comfortable. But yeah, again, the one thing, and I wanted to make this in the very beginning, but I was so excited that I sort of lost that point. This is really Ryan Poles', just like you said, this is his first like real draft. He was part of the scouting process with the Bears and his scouts from day one. Last year wasn't even a rebuild year. Last year was a teardown year. They tore everything down. This year is sort of, year one to start actually building things up in the way that to fulfill your vision. You think about all the moves that they made last year and even continuing into this offseason, letting David Montgomery walk, they traded Roquan, they traded Robert Quinn. Like, that was a teardown year. And it wasn't just to save salary cap. It was to start strategically positioning yourself to build for the future. And this is year one of that. So, again, I'm not going to sit here and act like, I didn't want an edge rusher. Like, you guys are idiots for wanting one. It's just, there's a level of understanding that you're not going to get everything in one draft. Like, sure, he could have reached at any one of these picks based on his board to say, we need an edge rusher here. But the edge on the board that's still on the board is number 8 for us. And there's 7 more ahead of him. That's when you start doing bad business. You know what I mean? Like, he's not going to reach right now for a need. And he doesn't have to, because just like you said, and I'm, sort of piggybacking off of you, that wasn't the only need on this team. There's a ton of needs on the Bears roster, and he addressed every single pick was addressing them, because this roster had a ton of holes. They won 3 games last year, Jack. I don't care what it looked like. I don't care how close a lot of the games were. They won 3 games. That means you have a bad team. It just is what it is.
Yeah, and there was a couple interesting comments, and I'll read through a couple of them. One being what Rod Marinelli had to say specifically about the defense that he kind of helped create. He said that the best indicator for future success at the 3 tech position is the broad jump. And guess who was number 1 in the broad jump in this draft? That would be Zach Pickens. So interesting. There you go. Todd McShay said it was a really solid value. Thinks he'll be an impact starter pretty soon. And then Mel Kiper thought that the Bears got a first-round talent in Zach Pickens. So, I mean, not for nothing, a lot of people like this pick, Frank. And like you kind of look at, the rest of the draft, the Bears took that pick at number 64. The next defensive end in that third, to be picked was at pick number 75, Zach Harrison to the Atlanta Falcons. There's one thing about just drafting position, but then again, we can't have it both ways where you're saying, well, just draft the position. You have to get the position. You just took a D tackle, but then you can't also say, well, I want best player available. It's not how it works. And that's one of the things I really liked about Ryan Poles in this draft is he talked about a lot after each round that went on. He talked about how the board fell the way that they kind of expected it to. And he didn't really seem to panic. He traded up once? Yes. To get Tyreek Stevenson, and he traded back a few times. And when he traded up, it wasn't the pace experience where you're giving up, second, third round picks in the future. Like he was trading up for not a lot of value, like value that you and I were like, how this makes sense. Like this makes why does it feel like Ryan Pace is getting fleeced in every single trade? Like Ryan Poles really did things that I thought made sense. And then moving to the fourth round to their next pick was Roschon Johnson. Now, full disclosure, Frank and I were texting at this point, basically yelling at each other about, the Bears need to get a center.
Yep. Bears
absolutely need to get a center. Well, Ryan Poles disagreed because he didn't draft a center at all. He really believes in Cody Whitehair and Lucas Patrick. If that's the correct decision, I guess we'll see. But I think, again, it goes back to sort of there's going to be multiple off seasons of building. So, but Frank, talking about Roschon Johnson.
Jackie, go ahead.
You talked a lot about dynasty. I'm going to pass it to you in a second. You talk a lot about dynasty. Was Roschon Johnson a guy that you had looked into at all?
No, I running backs, I after like 6 or 7, I don't, and he was not on a consensus, list of that number. But he's another one that I'm talking about. They have a type. If you watch his tape, he doesn't look any different than Khalil Herbert. They're the same exact player. But the thing is though, people who were upset that Monty left and wanted him to be re-signed, he never looked all that good in this run scheme. Like he's a shiftier type of, 2-3 cuts. And I don't know if that's just because his vision isn't all that great, or maybe just that system, didn't fit his strengths or what. But then you watched Khalil Herbert last year, the one cut and go, I see the hole and I hit it. That's exactly what they have in Roschon Johnson. Like that is the player. And D'Onta Foreman is the same exact way. They have 3 guys who are the exact type of runner, with probably Foreman being the most explosive, at least from Roschon's tape that I saw. He seems to have that same level of burst, Khalil Herbert, which isn't like great, but not like horrible either. I was right there with you of being upset that they didn't take a center. But two things. One, it makes more sense if you're just talking like on a sheet of paper. Forget best player available, just in terms of what the Bears needed. It makes more sense to not get a center this draft than to not get a defensive end, because you have 2 veterans who can man the fort for this year, if not even next year, if they can stay healthy, right? And with your centers, you need them. It's not just about blocking; it's about being able to identify the mic and just shifting lines. I mean, they do a lot of things that a rookie may not be able to step right in and do. To a point where I told you, we were texting, I was like, look, Jack, I want us to get a center, with the caveat being that Whitehair is going to start half the year or the full year, and this guy can probably be a starting or a starting guard this year, or just a rotational player when people get hurt, because centers don't always just plug right in. But the thing is the guy that we what was his name from Ohio State that we were looking at day 3, he didn't wind up going until like the 5th round or the 6th round. I mean, it was absurd the way he fell. So it's like it was very clear that no one was high on him. So it was like, yeah, we passed on him, but so did everyone else multiple times throughout this draft. So right. It was what it was. It was very clear that the league did not look highly on the rest of those centers that were left. I think the only negative thing that I have to say is if they pick the running back, which we figured they probably would because you still need a little extra punch. I would have wanted someone to be a little bit more explosive than that, right? Like someone that can, the home run hitter type of thing. And I don't think we have that coming out of the backfield. The only guy who can do it is Justin, because he's a running back too.
Well, so Roschon is an interesting pick. I mean, the way that Bijan Robinson is his teammate at Texas talked about him, you'd think that they literally just drafted the greatest player of all time. But like the very common thing that a lot of people gave Roschon Johnson a ton of credit for is his work ethic, how he is as a teammate. Like that seemed to be a big plus. And obviously the other big thing for him is his pass blocking ability.
Yeah.
And you and I had talked a lot about that when David Montgomery when we were talking about if the Bears should re-sign him, if he does leave, when he did leave, what will that really look like? Because Khalil Herbert, as explosive as he was, there was probably a reason that he wasn't getting more run in that offense, and it's because they needed some extra blocking because the offensive line was terrible. Roschon Johnson is now a guy that you can bring in on third down, passing downs, special teams. It just seems like a really solid pick. And one thing that shouldn't be forgotten in regards to this Bears team, yes, the defense was absolutely brutal. But you know what, Frank? So was the fucking special teams. And they drafted a lot of guys who can contribute both to the defense or offense, but also contribute on special teams as well. And that kind of seems to be where Roschon Johnson's value is. And again, you just kind of look around at some of the other running backs that were taken, both, just after Roschon Johnson. There wasn't a guy out there that I was like, oh, damn, I really wanted to get that guy. A lot of the running backs went before Roschon Johnson. So I'm not mad about the pick whatsoever. But I was just surprised that they went running back there, but I'm not mad about it. I like the things I hear from Roschon Johnson as an overall player, as opposed to just specifically what can he do at the running back position. The next pick, the Bears drafted again in the fourth round at number 133. It was the pick they got from the Eagles for Robert Quinn. And they drafted Tyler Scott, the wide receiver out of Cincinnati. Immediately, people were like, that's a steal. That's a steal right there. Boom. And I was kind of like, okay, well, why is he a steal? I saw Terry McLaurin. I saw T.Y. Hilton. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. Well, let's take a look. I got to say, Frank, I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty excited about Tyler Scott.
I am too. As a matter of fact, I may be the most excited about him than anyone else because, Darnell, Javon, Zach, those are the meat and potatoes. They're not going to have highlight tapes unless you actually isolate them and look at pancakes and yada, yada. Tyreek may be the day one starter opposite Jalen, but the more I watched his film, Jack, he may be the third best receiver on this roster already. Like, he might be better than Chase Claypool. Like, and the thing is, especially early on in a wide receiver's career, you can rely, if you're not there to be the wide receiver number one, you can rely a little bit more on physical ability. What is Tyler Scott's immediate thing that he brings to this Bears team? It's speed. It's just straight line speed. And I know, some people maybe thought that last year of Velus Jones, but his highlight tape, coming out, he wasn't making the types of grabs that Tyler Scott was on film. I don't forecast Tyler Scott being like an X by any means. I think DJ Moore is that and will continue to be that. But I mean, if you have someone like that to stretch the defense, that may even allow someone like Kmet to open up that middle. Chase Claypool, DJ Moore for slant routes. I mean, Darnell may be the slot guy this year, and Tyler Scott may be outside opposite DJ. I mean, we'll see, but I think that to me was my favorite pick. Everyone, I mean, people were pretty loud, not only on Twitter, on NFL Network, on ESPN, just saying like they thought this dude was going in the second round.
Yeah, and they got him in the fourth. And granted, now Are there reasons guys fall when they should necessarily, oh, I'm surprised I thought he'd go in the first round and, he ended up going to the fourth. Sometimes there's a reason for that we don't know about, it's a character thing. It's a work ethic thing. Could be a number of things, but just strictly looking at talent, you think of guys who do fall, Stephon Diggs obviously being number one. But again, the guy he's compared to, T.Y. Hilton was a third round pick, and he was extremely productive in Indianapolis for a very long time. And again, just the thing that people were saying about just like Justin Fields will love throwing to this guy. And I love hearing things like that. Granted, he's a little small, right? At 5'10", 177, but goddamn, apparently every fucking wide receiver in this class outside of Quentin Johnston was small. But you just like watch that speed, but it's not the same speed that Velus has, in terms of how he plays. He was way more like Cordero Patterson, Devin Hester, where it's like, okay, we have to manufacture touches to get this guy the football so he can use that speed to run. Whereas Tyler Scott, you can use him as a wide receiver. You can throw him the ball because it seems like he has pretty good hands. But the thing that makes me most excited, Frank, about him is breakaway speed. Like, once that ball is in his hands, he's gone. He's fucking gone. Like, it's not the same, whereas, like, because they do have, it's funny, they have very similar running backs, but they also have very similar wide receivers who are more of the possession guys. This dude will make a catch, but then also run away and score a 50-yard touchdown. Like, I'm over the moon about this pick. I'm very excited about Tyler Scott in this offense.
No, and you think about what we said about the Bears needing to invest in Justin Fields. What does Justin Fields do best right now? Throw the deep ball. You get another burner that stretches that field, and again, that should help. Hypothetically, Justin develop more in the short game. You have these safeties that are just drawn to Tyler Scott, that are drawn to a Darnell Mooney go route. That opens things up. Now you're talking about one-on-one coverage, or linebackers being out of position, or linebackers having to cover someone like Chase Claypool who lines up in the slot for a play, or 4 or 5 receivers. Like, this can create matchup issues. But I was sort of laughing a little bit because the way you described it was perfect, and it reminded me of I don't know why my brain, like, it kicked in my head. Do you remember the old NCAA games when you were doing like the whole recruiting things and everything, and there were some players that were just called athlete, ATH. It was like, and that, like, the way you described, like, that's sort of what Velus is like, when you watch this tape, like, the route running wasn't great, but you can see the explosion. It's like he's just an athlete right now. Versus like Tyler Scott, you see the route tree, you see the receiving skills, you see a wide receiver, versus where Velus was more of like an unrefined Deebo Samuel, like a poor man's Deebo Samuel. So I love the pick, Jack. Like I said, that to me, that once I saw his film and saw what people thought about him, I was most excited about that pick.
Well, it's funny because one of the things we wanted to talk about was simply just what was our favorite pick. Unfortunately, I think you and I both kind of just spoiled it and have, of course, the same fucking pick. Because why? You know what? For sake of it, I'll say Tyreek Stevenson was my favorite pick. Just because I like, which is funny because it's a corner, and we talked for hours about how if they take a corner, I'm going to be pissed and yada, yada, yada. Granted, they didn't do that in the first round, but again, they got an offensive lineman, they got a defensive lineman, then they took a corner they really liked. I'm okay with that. And just watching his tape, I think he's a really, really good physical corner. And I also don't want to have the same answer as you. But unfortunately, Tyler Scott would also be mine if I was being brutally honest. Frank, 5th round pick. I think this is kind of the last one that I really want to talk about. We'll still cover the names just so we can say we did, that I really wanted to discuss. So they traded that 5th round pick to the Jaguars so they could trade up to get Tyreek Stevenson. Again, number 136. They just drafted at 133. So again, you kind of didn't have to pay anything to move up in that 2nd round. Like, that's savvy. I like that. And then in the 5th round, they're one of their 2 picks. They drafted Noah Sewell, the linebacker from Oregon, who, Frank, I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't even know was in this draft. I remember hearing about him like 2 years ago, and
Yep.
like everybody was like, he's a first round pick. This guy's a fucking stud. And he goes in the 5th round to the Bears. And again, I think this was the pick they got for Roquan as well. I can't remember why they have this pick.
Maybe.
But anyways, people again really, really like this pick, Frank. What did you think about Noah Sewell going in the 5th round to the Bears?
That was the first. It was funny because I was like, why do I know his name? And finally, it was like 2 days after the first, or after the draft, maybe a day after, someone had it, because I always, like, you know, a week after the draft, look at the way too early draft picks. Noah Sewell was mocked to the Bears in the 2 early draft picks in the 1st round, and like on like 3 different websites. And someone on Twitter, I should have saved it so I could give them their credit, but just know this was not my finding. But yeah, they were like, this guy was touted as a 1st round pick, so clearly the talent's there. But the one thing, you know, speaking of that, there are a lot of scouts that they don't like, even if your production stays the same, they don't like when you sort of top out your freshman or sophomore year. They want to see like ascension. They want to see you continue to grow. And that's sort of what happened with him. It was just sort of, man, like the flash, this is him. And then it didn't get better than that. So that sort of spoiled everything. Not saying he still should have been a 1st round pick, but yeah, my first thought was his tape looks good. He reminded me a lot of Jack Sanborn, to be honest with you. And yeah, I think, I mean, that's going to be, you know, we talk about what we're going to talk about in the offseason. That's going to be a camp battle to look out for. I would assume is who's going to be the Sam. Are they going to be competing for the Sam?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Because why am I blanking on who was the guy that we signed to be the Will?
TJ Edwards.
The Edmonds and Edwards, both Eds, throw me off.
I know. You're not going to be the only person who does it, Frank. I promise.
Yeah. But, I mean, Sewell should, you know, be competing, which is huge for a 5th rounder. He's going to be competing for a starting job.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, it's look, the Bears are not the most talented team, the most talented roster in football. And again, I did confirm that this was the pick that they got for Roquan. So basically, if you want to do the comparison, the Bears traded Roquan Smith for Gervon Dexter and for Noah Sewell, and we'll see how that plays out. They also traded him for
fleeced them, Jackie.
For the ability to not pay an off-ball linebacker $20+ million. So that's insane. Anyways, yeah, Noah Sewell is an interesting player because there's a lot of talent. He has a lot of experience playing in that type of position. I think, Frank, what happened was Noah Sewell was a 1st round prospect as a linebacker. But what happened was Oregon, it sounds like, tried to make him an edge rusher, and the production obviously fell off because he is not an edge rusher. And the only reason I know that is because I saw a lot of Bears fans asking on Twitter, hey, can we make this guy an edge rusher? And everybody, all the draft analysts said, no, don't do that. Let him play linebacker. And again, people who are, God, you know, I saw a ton of people being like, you know, this team just hates Jack Sanborn. They just don't want him to start. They don't want to give him a fair opportunity. If Jack Sanborn is displaced by a 5th round rookie, like, then he probably wasn't all that good to begin with. Like, granted, he made a lot of plays in 5 games, but man, listen, I like Jack Sanborn. I think he can be a very productive player. I think he is going to start at the Sam linebacker position at week 1. But doesn't Frankie kind of feel like one of those Chicago athletes that people just fall in love with irrationally and just can't understand why the guy isn't an all-pro linebacker? Like, doesn't he just kind of have that feel to him?
Potentially, yeah. But I think some of it's deserved because for an undrafted guy, I mean, me and you have both said, even before they signed Tremaine Edmonds, like, if they just walked in and he's the Mike going in the next year, he earned that. But based on his play,
sure.
he earned whatever they decided to give to him. But again, this roster isn't all that great, and this is a 5th round pick. He's gonna compete for the job. I would give Sanborn the edge because he's already had a full year in this system. He looked really good. He's a really good football player. And Sewell is going to be a special teamer. If like that's best case scenario. Like no one's running from, or let me not say it that way. Jack Sanborn shouldn't be running from any sort of competition. He's an undrafted guy.
Because that's not who he is.
Exactly. He's an undrafted guy who made his way to this roster. When his number was called, he was ready for it. He's not sitting around fucking pouting. I would assume if he can be unbiased in this, he gets it. He was still undrafted at the end of the day. No matter what he showed in those 5 games, they're looking to build this roster. And if best player available was the same position you're looking to play, they're going to pick him. It wasn't a first-round pick, so it's not automatically, well, we have to give this guy a chance. Go out there and beat him out. And I think he will. I think Sanborn's a better player than him, to be quite honest. But again, you still need depth at these positions. Anyone who, like, how low do you think of Jack Sanborn if you think a fifth-round pick's just going to take his job immediately? That's a little bit weird. But with that being said, this is not abnormal for really anybody. Because I remember when the Bears signed TJ Edwards, I forget what podcast it was, but there was a local Philly guy. It may have been Hogan Johns, actually. There was a local Philly guy who came on, and they were like, tell us about him. What is, what is he, what is he like on the field? What is he like in the locker room? And one of the things that came up from the local guy was like, look, every single year they drafted someone to be his replacement, and he just kept fucking beating them out. And he kept beating them out to a point where they couldn't afford him anymore. That's why he walked, because he played so well that, it was out of their price range of what they wanted to pay for that position. And it's like, that may be what happens to Jack Sanborn. Maybe that's what happens. Every single year they think, maybe we can improve on this guy, but he just continues to get better and continues to get better. Your spot isn't guaranteed, no matter where you're drafted, but especially as an undrafted rookie. And right. I think Sanborn himself would tell you that. He's an underdog as is. So it is what it is. But the ultimate point, though, forget even that, is, again, you need depth. Someone wrote on Twitter the other day, and I retweeted it. They were like, why, like, even the Tyler Scott thing, well, why did we trade a second for Chase Claypool then? You need depth at every position, dude. You don't just get 2 players at a position and then you're done. Unless it's quarterback. Then you want your starter, your backup, and maybe a third guy. But, like, even offensive linemen, you need a room. Wide receivers, you need a room. Linebackers, you need a room. These guys play special teams as well. It's something that you hit on earlier. Like, I don't know. People are just really fucking stupid. I think it has less to do with loving Jack Sanborn, because, again, I think he's earned that. He's earned the right to be a fan favorite at this point.
Sure.
But, like, give it a fucking break, dude. Like, if he beats this guy out, they're not just going to bench him just because they have some vendetta against Jack Sanborn.
I will agree with you that the person who said, why did you draft Tyler Scott, or why did you trade a second for Chase Claypool if you drafted Tyler Scott? I will say that person is stupid. I agree, because they obviously don't listen to the Bear With Us podcast, where we talked about, don't be surprised when the Bears draft another wide receiver, because the depth here is still not very good.
Yep.
Like, yes, you have 3 penciled in starters, but one is a guy who didn't really produce anything in his first half-ish season with the Bears, and the other guy's coming off of a very serious injury, and we don't know what he's going to look like. Oh, and also he was a former 5th-round pick who may not be all that good. Like, we still don't know about Darnell Mooney. I do think he will be good, just as long as he's healthy. Frank, the other picks, we'll run through them. Terrell Smith, the cornerback out of Minnesota, again, doubling. That's kind of where I like doubling up on positions where I don't value as much in the later rounds. I think that's very smart. They did not have a 6th-round pick, and the reason for that is the Bears traded 6th-round pick, number 178 overall, to Miami in exchange for wide receiver Jakeem Grant.
Oh, that was that pick, huh? Interesting.
Yeah, it was. The Bears traded the second 6th-round pick to the Chargers in exchange for 2 7th-round selections. Man.
That's
okay.
Weird.
Yeah, okay. They traded up last year, I guess. Or traded up. Yes, they traded up. Okay. Whatever. And then they drafted in the 7th round this year, the first ever Kennesaw State player, Travis Bell, another defensive tackle.
He's the first ever player at that school?
Out of that school. Football player.
Oh, out of that school. You said at that school. I thought he was the first enrolled.
He was. That too.
Oh,
no,
okay.
I don't know if that's true. And then Kendall Williamson, another cornerback out of Stanford. It was a supplemental pick.
Little known fact about Kendall Williamson, that's Zion's brother.
I did not. Is that?
No, I made that up. I made that up.
Oh, okay. You said it with such confidence. Where I'm like, yeah, I guess that could be real. You son of a bitch. Anyways, no, all in all, I'm not super into. I think we've talked about this before as well. I'm not super into grading draft picks, or draft classes, until they actually see the field. But if gun to my head, I was told, hey, grade this draft class, I would probably go with a very solid B+. I don't think he knocked it out of the park. I loved the Darnell Wright selection. Honestly, that might be my favorite pick. I just didn't want to go super obvious with it.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of guys that I don't necessarily love in this draft yet. I don't know a lot about them. So one thing, Frank, and I'll let you give us your grade as well if you want to. I really like that Ryan Poles drafted guys from schools that everybody has heard of outside of Kennesaw State in the 7th round.
Yep.
Everywhere else, Tennessee, Florida, South Carolina, Miami, Cincinnati, like big name schools, Texas. Everybody's heard of those schools. And for reasons, because those are where all the good football players go.
Yep.
You're not drafted out of North Carolina. You're not drafted out of fucking Ashland State. None of that. None of it. All right?
Yeah, no, Ryan Poles had the tendency to get very cute with that. And, he hit on Tariq Cohen and then was like, well, if I can hit there, we're going everywhere. We're going to all the small schools. No, I mean, I like that because we sort of opened the podcast talking with the Jalen Carter thing and the Eagles having like 10% of their defense is fucking Georgia players. Like, use these Power 5 conference teams to like, that talent is at those teams for a fucking reason. I'm not saying don't scout the small teams. There could be diamonds in the rough. By all means, do that. But I mean, cut it out. Like this isn't rocket science when it comes to that. Like there's a reason that Bama and Georgia and Tennessee even continuously get top 50 picks every single year. It just is what it is. And until that changes, you keep going to that well. So I was very excited about that. But if I had to put a grade, Jackie, A+, I'm thinking 17-0. I'm thinking, Super Bowl. No, I was in that like B to B+ range as well. And the reason that it wasn't higher than that for me, because we're fans at the end of the day. We didn't scout all these guys. We didn't do all the work for with even the corner or the defensive tackles or anything. So we're coming at things based off what other people are saying in the moment and a little bit of homework after the fact. But I did want a center going into the draft. I really did. I love that they got the right tackle. Me being a fan, it's hard for me to shed that. I wanted an edge as well. They didn't get that. I'm able to compartmentalize and not act like Ryan Poles is being negligent by not getting the positions that I wanted. Frank, the guy who didn't even fucking scout the positions, the position groups. You know what I mean? But going in, I did want those. Those are my expectations. It didn't happen. But, I mean, first through the picks, 1st through 5th, all have a chance to be day one contributors. That didn't mean superstars right out of the gate. It didn't even mean starters right out of the gate. If I had to put money on one of them to be a starter, it'd be Darnell Wright. Obviously, I don't think Borum is going to keep that job. With Tyreek Stevenson being a very close second as to who could start day one. That's good. That's very, very good. And then anything on top of that is the cherry on top. You're talking about if Dexter and Pickens can overtake Billings and whoever else they're going to have on the interior, maybe Justin Jones again. If they can overtake them year one, that's a huge win, barring any injury. If they get hurt and there's some, if Billings or Walker or anyone gets hurt and they have to play because of that, that's a different story. I mean, like come out of camp, kick ass, and just take their shit. That would be a win. So, yeah, I'm very excited about it.
And then, so we kind of went over our favorite picks from the draft. I did want to talk about, if you have a least favorite, go for it. Or if there was maybe a player, or not even necessarily the player, because I think we've talked pretty positive about the guys who were drafted. Maybe, Frank, was there a player or a position that at a certain spot that they went with this position that you were maybe hoping the Bears would go a little bit different of a route?
Yes, it was. Do you have one off the top of your head? I'm going to the draft because it was one in the second round that I wanted bad.
Yeah, so as much as I have fallen in love with Tyreek Stevenson, and I'm very happy that he is on the Bears. The pick right after him, the Giants selected John Michael Schmitz, the center from Minnesota.
That's what it was. That was mine.
That was it for
Schmitz.
You too? Okay.
Yes, I couldn't remember the center's name because it wasn't the Ohio State guy. I was upset. I was a little upset, Jackie.
Yeah, because the people, talked about him like, I think teams called him like a red chip player, a locker room guy, someone you really want in that locker room. And again, I really wanted them to continue to upgrade that offensive line, and instead they traded up for a corner, which I was kind of, at the time I was disappointed with because I was right on board with you. I just wanted a center because I don't trust Cody. There's a reason Cody Whitehair was moved to left guard. We saw him play center before, and it wasn't all that impressive.
His snapping ability.
Lucas Patrick, and Lucas Patrick, he might be good, but he's been hurt too much. We just don't know what's there. So I was kind of hoping they pick a captain of their offensive line, which is typically your center. And then to see him go a pick later, that kind of hurt. That was kind of
I know.
That kind of sucks.
And to let everyone know that this was not a hindsight thing, I pulled up our text thread Friday at 7:40 p.m. We were talking about the Dexter pick, and you said he tested like an elite prospect. I was like, good, never heard of him, but let's go. And then I said the Bears traded up. And you said only gave up a fifth. And I was like, I don't hate it. And then you replied for a corner with the shaking my head emojis. And I said, God damn it. Isn't John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt available? That was the Schmitz guy. And then I said, fuck. And he goes in the very next pick. So, we wanted it in the moment as well. And it just did not happen. But again, that makes more sense to me, just on paper, all things equal, to not go with the center this draft because you have guys who are formidable. Edge, I'm really hoping they dip into the either Leonard Floyd, bringing him back in town, or who is the other former Colt that's out there, Jackie?
For what?
The free agent, the pass rusher.
Yannick
Ngakoue. So
I thought you meant Rock Ya-Sin, the corner who got traded for Yannick Ngakoue, because they're both available.
No, I don't want him. I don't need another cornerback on this roster. My head will fucking explode. They're gonna have to dip into the free agent well. Because again, maybe you're right. Maybe they're a little bit higher on Trevis Gipson, but I don't see how you could be.
Yeah, so that ultimately brings us to a point, Frank, that I really wanted to talk about, because a lot of the focus on this offseason, and very fair, very understandable, has been on Ryan Poles and his ability to draft, because there were a lot of question marks after this last draft, right? One thing that I do not think got talked about quite enough in this offseason, and it's something that I have, and you can attest to this, I have sort of been the leading force in terms of getting this out into the ether. Matt Eberflus is not a finished product as a head coach. He should not be someone that you just trust is going to be a good head coach. I personally don't think he has shown enough to just give me my full confidence that Ryan Poles can draft the perfect players. He can draft whoever he wants, and Matt Eberflus and his coaching staff will be able to develop everybody. Because there were a lot of guys last year, Frank, who did not develop the way that I was hoping they would, the way that you were hoping they would, the way that Bears fans were hoping they would. Trevis Gipson went back to the position that he played in college that got him drafted and looked like ass. Like, he looked bad last year. Where was, outside of the corners that we talked about, those later round picks or the undrafted guys, Jack Sanborn, where else was the development? I didn't see a whole lot of it. And that was a common theme, a common issue we had with Matt Nagy during his tenure was, okay, you talk about this offense at being a 202, but nobody has really stepped up. Nobody has been better in your offense. Now, granted, Matt Eberflus had a very bad roster this past season. But can he just be ultimately trusted to just be able to do what he needs to do to develop the guys that Ryan Poles picks. And I think that's a very important conversation to be had, especially where some of these guys got drafted.
I agree with you, Jack. Depending on, I know you're like laying out, where Eberflus is as it stands. So I don't think you're criticizing him, but I think anyone who would like leap that far and say there was no development is being too harsh. That's one thing that we have to check, this year to see the carryover from guys. Does Jalen Johnson get better? Does Kyler Gordon get better? Does Jaquan Brisker get better? Do some of the pass rushers get better? Does the interior, now that it's built up now, does that look good in this system? So like, again, the same way that I said that for Ryan Poles, last year really wasn't a rebuild year, it was a teardown year. Last year for Matt Eberflus was more of like a laying the foundation. Like the cement really wasn't even dry yet until maybe like mid-year, because it's a brand new system for even the carryover players. You're going from a Vic Fangio inspired 3-4 defense to a 4-3 cover 2. There's usually not very much carryover on the defensive line and the linebacker. That's why Roquan left, because they didn't know, they never tried him in the middle, but they probably felt like he didn't have the athleticism to do that in that type of a defense. I'm fucking stuttering like crazy. So that is one thing that we will keep track of. I mean, it's one thing that through Nagy's tenure, we were like, who has gotten better this year? Where's the progress? We will continue to do that. But again, last year to me was like establishing this baseline. This is who Jalen Johnson is right now in this defense. Where is he going to be at mid-year next year, at the end of the year next year, the year after that if he's still on the roster? And it's like, so now that we have year one under us, I don't feel comfortable judging Matt Eberflus yet. I mean, to a point where what do we have him? 24th, 25th on our coaches rating. He's not very high, not so much of a fault of his own, but now is when you start to see that. This year is year one for him to show this is the identity that I'm building. This is the hits principle that we're building. And now we can move forward and build together with Ryan Poles. But I'm already, Jackie, here's the thing. To your grander point, this is really the last thing that I have on the topic. Even if Eberflus flames out, he winds up not being the greatest coach. The development just isn't there. And I know the pushback from other people is going to be, well, Ryan Poles is the guy who hired him. And that is true. But with the way Ryan Poles has managed these 2 drafts and these 2 off seasons, he's already shown me that he's savvy enough to be here through a coaching fire and hiring another guy. Like he is, the level of savviness that he's shown in the last couple of years is more than any front office. You think of Phil Emery, you think of Ryan Pace, and you think of Jerry Angelo. Those were the big, front offices of our lifetime. That was never there. The things that he's doing with the trading back and just like, being open to the media and talking through his process, we've never had that before.
Yeah. It's interesting because, football, it's such a fast, because you're able to turn things around so quickly, where everybody does get sort of tied together. I remember having conversations where like, maybe Pace does go, but, or maybe Pace stays and Nagy goes, maybe he should get another opportunity, yada, yada, yada. But like, it kind of does remind me this situation a little more of like baseball almost, where like the Cubs, for example, hire Rick Renteria to be their coach. Theo Epstein's doing the teardown. He's rebuilding. He's drafting the guys. He's signing guys that make sense. And then when they're ready to win, you go and get one of the best coaches in baseball. And granted, it's not exactly the same. You can't necessarily translate it to the same way because it's such a vastly different sport, obviously. But it kind of does feel like that, where it's like, if Ryan Poles, like if Matt Eberflus doesn't continue to progress the way that we hope he does, the team, the offense, the defense, like it wouldn't be a shock to me to see Ryan Poles stick around and get to pick another head coach.
Same.
Granted, that is so far down the road that we can't even, we probably shouldn't begin to talk about it. But since you brought it up, it does kind of have that feel where it's like Ryan Poles had to tear this entire thing down, and maybe he just got a placeholder for now just to kind of help him, put the pieces together. And then when everything is assembled, if things aren't progressing the correct way, I'll leave it at this. Ryan Poles has shown me more at this point than than Matt Eberflus has,
Yeah.
and maybe that's not fair, right? But I talked about it many times throughout last season. I had a lot of question marks about the way that Matt Eberflus was going about things, and I'm hoping we don't see as much of that in his second season.
No, I agree, and I hope that this conversation isn't coming across like we're advocating for Matt Eberflus to be fired. I'm glad you sort of tied it in a bow there. The overall point is that Ryan Poles has already shown me so much. Like he's shown just that level of savviness that you need to be a general manager in the NFL. And the moves that he's made and the way that he's carried himself in negotiations has been phenomenal. My only like semi pushback to that though, to our own theory that we just came up with, is I wonder then if that is the case, if he's just a placeholder head coach, is Ryan Poles then married to a cover two? Because he's building a cover two defense. The players he's getting are fitting, you know what I mean? Like they're fitting what a cover two coach wants to do. So whoever you would move on to, whether it was a defensive or offensive head coach, if it's defenses, I wonder if you'd be looking for a cover two or at least a base 4-3 instead of a 3-4, because then you'd have to tear the whole thing down again. Not the whole thing, but there's usually not much carryover pieces from that. So that would be curious because that's the one thing that Poles talked about. That was part of his job interview. He said, if you're hiring me, I'm bringing Matt Eberflus. This wasn't these weren't untied signings. This was a marriage coming in. He had already identified as head coach.
It just goes back to like, I've never been a big proponent of the 3-4 defense. I prefer just personally a 4-3. So I kind of just hope that they just, if it does change, they stick with 4-3. I don't even know why we're specifically talking about this. It's not going to happen for a very long time at this point. And there's other things that we could be talking about. But since we're having a conversation, Frank, one other thing I did want to touch on a little bit, if there was any other disappointment that I had coming from the draft outside of the centers or the edge rushers, I was kind of hoping one of the tight ends would fall a little bit more for the Bears to get. It sounded like there were some injury concerns on Washington, and I kind of hope that the Bears would maybe take a chance at a guy like that. But again, they're in this tough position where they can't really be affording to take chances on projects. Darnell Washington is who I'm referring to. He was drafted by the Steelers. So I get it on that level. But I guess, they're going to roll with Cole Kmet and just hope that he continues his ascension from last year and, really becomes a focal point of this offense. Was there anything else, any other position you were kind of like, damn, I was really hoping we might get that?
No, defensive end. I mean, we got the right tackle. We knew that was going to happen, but defensive end and center were the two. I wouldn't have been upset at tight end, but again, I feel similarly to what I was saying about the center position. And like, Kmet may not be the game-breaking, game-changing type of guy, but he's a serviceable tight end. And Rob Tonyan is a really, really good red zone threat. So I think they're good going into next year. That may have been one thing that if they had a tight end pretty high on their board and they didn't want to take him, they'd be looking to trade back, to gather more picks. They just felt like they were set at that position. I think that is the one thing we should have touched on earlier too, was like, I think that gets lost as well when talking about best player available. You don't always just select them because they're the best. You look to trade back and gather more picks because you don't necessarily need to fill that hole. You know what I mean? So that could have happened with tight end if they felt strongly about Cole Kmet. But no, those are the two positions for me. Everything else I think is covered. I think there's going to be some camp battles. That's the one thing I'm really excited about is the camp battles. I want to see, is Stevenson going to come right in and be the outside guy? Is Kyler going to have something to say about that? Are they going to sort of, pin them against each other throughout the training camps? What's going to happen at center? Is Tevin Jenkins just your surefire left guard, or do they sign someone after someone gets cut? I mean, there's going to be depth there. Hell, do you put like Larry Borum at left guard? Who the fuck knows what's going to happen? Like, there's still going to be a little bit of movement on that offensive line. So that's what I'm really excited about coming out of this draft.
Yeah, and that brings me up to my kind of last question I have for you. And is there anything, I guess what's left to be done in this offseason? Is there anything else, any other position, any other player outside of, I know, you touched on Ngakoue a little bit. I obviously think that just makes a ton of sense. Or, obviously Frank Clark, depending on what he wants to do, being in his age 31 season, a little bit older. Is there anything else that you feel like they have to do before the season, or before the off season really gets started?
Edge, yeah. You have to sign Yannick Ngakoue or Leonard Floyd, or both. Fuck it. We don't really have any edge rushers.
I guess you could, yeah.
But I would feel more comfortable if we had one more like swing tackle guard type of player. Larry Borom, I think, is going to be a solid backup. But Tev at left guard, if you can just ensure me that he's healthy, and maybe I wouldn't feel this way, because then maybe you can, you don't have to worry about it too much, and you can plug in Borom for a game or two where injuries happen. But I think you still need one more player, because I know people have been talking about Doug Kramer, but he was a 6th-round pick. I mean, I don't, you know what I mean? And I'm thinking like if Braxton Jones goes down, are we inserting Larry Borom at left tackle? Like that, I feel like we need a little bit more depth on the offensive line. So I think Ryan Poles is going to, see as the deadlines get here for roster cut downs and things. They'll probably wait till then to play. That's usually when you get more veteran type of guys for the trenches and have that happen. But that's about it. I mean, again, I thought Ryan Poles did a phenomenal job at filling holes on this team, because there was a lot of them.
Yeah, I feel good about this draft. You just kind of, again, look at their unofficial depth chart. And, I mean, if you're just looking at it right now, they added at the very least 2 starters, potentially a 4th wide receiver, 2 rotational defensive tackles that they absolutely needed, and then a couple corners that they can plug and play, and then a 4th potential linebacker. And, again, special teams players to make that unit a little bit better. You kind of hit the nail on the head. There's going to be a lot more competition at this camp than there was last year at this time. And that's really exciting. And there are, I just think that Ryan Poles, while I don't think this was like a grand slam, draft or anything like that, I think he did a lot of what he needed to do to get this thing on the right track, which I just think is very exciting.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, the theme for this offseason, now that the draft is over, the floor has been risen. The floor has absolutely been risen at almost every single position group. Again, we talked about even signing Nate Davis to be your right guard. That's an upgrade over Tevin Jenkins, because he's been playing right guard his whole career. But now Tevin Jenkins moves over to left guard. That's an upgrade over Cody Whitehair. Cody Whitehair going to center is an upgrade over Sam Mustipher. You upgraded. That's raising your floor. You sign some defensive tackles. You sign a defensive end, DeMarcus Walker. Hopefully you get a even better edge rusher than that. You get Javon. You get Zach. Like you're getting these guys. You're raising the floor. You look at what I mean. Can you even off the top of your head you've been looking at the roster a little bit more than me throughout this episode, but can you name another interior defensive lineman that was on the Bears outside of Justin Jones last year? Because off the top of my head, I can't. And we're fucking fanatics. We have a goddamn Bears podcast.
There was that guy that they got from the Vikings.
The guy with the number. The guy with the number that made that one play in one of those weeks. Yeah, I remember him.
What? Shit. Hold on. I'm gonna pull it
That's
up.
That's my point. But Jack, that is my point. People who watch every single week, who keep up with practices and OTAs, it's off the top of my, if I were to look at the roster, I'd be like, oh yeah, duh. But my point is the floor has been risen. Now again, if this Stevenson kid hits, he's an upgrade.
Angelo Blackson
had a couple made some plays.
Armon Watts was who
Armon Watts had a few batted passes.
You don't remember Mike Pennell Jr.? Come on, Frankie.
Faintly. But my point is, Stevenson hits, upgrade over Kyler. Kyler is an upgrade over Jalen Jones on the inside. Like, you're upgrading, you're raising the floor of this team. That's going to be the name of this episode. The Bears have raised the floor. They haven't raised hell just yet, but they've raised the floor.
Yeah, and I'm excited. I love Darnell Wright. I think that pick is just so smart. I think it's going to really, really be a good pick.
I'm going to DM him. You think he'll come on our podcast?
I think he would.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it right now.
He might be listening. He might be listening as we're talking to this. Well, probably not as we're talking, because it's not a live podcast. But maybe he listens to the Spotify version of it afterwards. Or maybe he listens on YouTube, where you can find us as well. But Frankie, a very solid, successful draft, I think. Very excited to see these players and what they do. you know, in the offseason and really just overall what this roster really looks like. You know, I think more so than if the, you know, regardless of what the players do at this level, Frank, I got to say, I'm very happy with the process that Ryan Poles, this front office, the coaching staff, the way that they've handled this offseason. I've been very happy about the way that they've done it. The trade back to get DJ Moore, extra picks next year, the draft selections, how they came to the determination to get Darnell Wright, trading back a pick to get an extra pick for one spot when there was a guy you just weren't going to draft. Like, I just have really liked the process. I like the profiles that Ryan Poles has drafted, the athletic scores, because again, it just really seems like he's just a guy that believes in the athletic talent, and his coaches will be able to coach them the way that they need to. There's something about that I really like. So yeah, overall, I think this has been a very successful start to the offseason. And we'll see if any big other signings happen, if any other trades happen, you know, but we're getting closer to the start of the 2023 season.
That we are, Jackie. And I'm so excited about it because fucking basketball sucks. Baseball sucks. Hockey sucks. And I love boxing, but it's only, you know, it's fighters only fight twice a year. Yeah.
Yeah. Once every 4 months or so.
Yeah. But I mean, there's usually a fight every Saturday, but it's just, you know, different people. It's you got to do a lot to keep up with it.
There's a reason we don't talk about basketball or baseball on this podcast anymore.
Yeah, there's a Jerry sell the team sign like a half a block away from my house.
Did you put it there?
No, fuck no. I want him to own that team forever. I'd like him to sell the Bulls.
But what about the Bulls?
He can sell the Bulls. I want him to own the White Sox forever.
Forever. Yeah, that's fair. But we appreciate you guys listening to the Bear With Us podcast. Frank, I don't know why, but for like the last 3 times I've said the Bear With Us podcast today, I've almost said the Corked Up podcast.
I heard it. I heard the hesitation in your voice, and I've been highly disappointed.
I'm shocked. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I think I was just so used to saying it, and you know, I haven't said the Bear With Us podcast as much, but you know, bear with me on that. That's solid wordplay for you. Thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you next week.
Later, Jackie. Later, everybody.